What if the man sleeping next to you is not who you think? They say you never truly know the person you sleep next to, that secrets are the invisible third person in every marriage. But I thought I knew James down to his very DNA, down to the rhythm of his breathing and the specific way he mumbled in his sleep. Yet 3 weeks ago, the man I had been married to for 5 years began to glitch like a computer program that hadn't quite loaded correctly. It started with the subtle things, the kind of details only a wife would notice, like the night we went to our favorite bistro and he ordered a ribeye steak rare, dripping with blood, when for half a decade James had refused to eat meat unless it was burnt to a crisp well done. And when I questioned him, he just laughed it off with a hollow sound, claiming he wanted to try something new. But the unease settled in my stomach like a stone. Then, a few days later, I walked past the bathroom and froze because I saw him brushing his teeth with his left hand, holding the brush with an awkward stiffness, despite the fact that James was so dominant with his right hand that he couldn't even write his name with his left. And when I confronted myself in the mirror, telling myself I was crazy, that people change habits, that stress makes people act strangely, the feeling in my gut wouldn't go away, screaming that I was living with a stranger who had studied my husband for a role but hadn't quite memorized the script. The storm finally broke last night while James was in the shower. His phone was sitting on the nightstand, buzzing aggressively against the wood, and although I usually respect his privacy, the name on the screen made my heart stop. It just said, "The Swap." So I unlocked it, his passcode still the same, and opened a thread with a number I didn't recognize, reading the last terrifying message that said, "She suspects nothing. The transition is complete. You can dispose of the other one now." And I dropped the phone on the carpet as my mind raced with the horrific implication of dispose of the other one. I needed to see him. I needed to see the physical proof of who he was. So I crept into the bathroom where the steam was thick and suffocating, and I squinted through the glass door at the man standing under the spray, waiting for him to turn. And when he did, I saw it. Or rather, I didn't see it, because the jagged white scar on his right shoulder, a mark he'd had since a childhood bike accident, was completely gone, leaving his skin smooth and unblemished, confirming my worst fear that the man in the shower looked like James, sounded like James, and smelled like James, but he wasn't James. I backed out of the room, trembling, and ran downstairs to the basement where James kept his man cave, tearing through his desk drawers in a panic, looking for anything that could explain this nightmare, until I found an old college yearbook hidden behind a false panel. And flipping through it, I found his photo, Jamison Miller, but right next to it was a face that made me gasp. Jackson Miller, an identical twin brother he had never told me about, a mirror image with eyes that looked like broken glass. I pulled out my phone and Googled Jackson Miller, and the search results were a parade of red flags. Mugshots, arrest records for fraud, identity theft, and aggravated assault, with the most recent article stating Jackson Miller released on parole 6 months ago. And I pieced it together instantly. The swap wasn't just a text, it was a coup, and my successful architect husband had been replaced by his criminal twin who needed access to our bank accounts, our house, and my life. I grabbed my car keys, desperate to flee, but as I turned to the stairs, I heard a creak and looked up to see the man, Jackson, standing at the top of the stairs wearing nothing but a towel and holding a gun, his voice stripped of James' warmth, cold and flat, as he told me I wasn't supposed to come down here. He walked down the stairs slowly, telling me that James was indisposed, that James was weak and drowning in debt I didn't know about, and that he, Jackson, was the better version of him, doing me a favor. And as he raised the gun to silence me, my hand landed on a heavy brass golf trophy on the desk. I smashed it into his hand, sending the gun skittering across the concrete floor. And though he was stronger, I was faster, kicking him in the knee and grabbing the weapon, pointing it at his chest and screaming at him to take me to my husband. We drove to a storage unit across town silently, the gun pressed to his ribs, and he led me to Unit 402, rolling up the metal door with trembling hands to reveal James, my James, tied to a chair with duct tape over his mouth, looking beaten, dehydrated, and terrified, but alive.
I pistol-whipped Jackson, knocking him unconscious, and rushed to untie James, who collapsed into my arms sobbing, apologizing for keeping his brother a secret, saying Jackson had been stalking us for months. And we left the evil twin locked in the storage unit for the police to find, calling 911 from the car, believing the nightmare was finally over. Life went back to normal surprisingly fast, with James being more attentive than ever, cooking dinner every night. But last night, on our anniversary, while we were eating spaghetti bolognese and drinking expensive wine, James smiled and said, "I'm just so glad you noticed the scar. If you hadn't checked my shoulder, I'd be dead." And I froze, putting my fork down slowly, asking him to repeat himself. And when he confirmed that my noticing the missing scar was the key, I looked at him with a cold, sharp smile and whispered the truth that shattered the room. "James, you told me that story on our first date, but I checked your medical records years ago when we applied for life insurance, and you never had a bike accident. You got that scar removed cosmetically 3 years ago because you thought it was ugly, meaning you haven't had a scar on your shoulder since 2022. The color drained from his face as I continued, my voice steady, explaining that because the man in the shower didn't have a scar, I knew instantly that the man in the shower was the real James, which means the man I found in the basement, the man who attacked me, was Jackson. But in the storage unit, while I was distracted looking for a knife to cut the ropes, Jackson had woken up, switched clothes with James, tied James to the chair, and put the tape over his mouth. So when I rescued the man in the chair, I was actually rescuing the evil twin and leaving my innocent James locked in that unit to rot. Jackson dropped the act, a dark, evil grin spreading across his face as he admitted it, asking what I was going to do since I was stuck with him now. But I just poured more wine and told him I knew he was Jackson the moment we got in the car because he drove with one hand instead of two, and I didn't turn him in because James was boring and broke, but a criminal genius like Jackson was exactly what I needed to liquidate our assets and secure a new $5 million life insurance policy. As his eyes widened and he started clutching his throat, choking on the pink foam forming at his mouth, I whispered that the real James hated mustard, but Jackson happily ate the mustard I mixed into the bolognese to mask the bitter taste of the arsenic. So I stepped over his dying body, waited for his heart to stop, and then dialed 911, sobbing hysterically into the receiver that my husband's crazy twin had finally returned to kill him.